Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a paper that's not just adding to a discussion, it's really pushing back. Launching a counterattack, you could say.
That's a good way to put it. This isn't your standard research paper.
No, definitely not. It's more like a scientific defense. The very existence of a whole field of study is kind of on the line here.
Right.
We're diving deep into a call for an end to calls for the end of invasion biology. The lead author is Daniel Simberloff with GeneRS Vitule.
A major figure in the field, Simberloff.
Absolutely. And our mission today is to understand why this paper needed to mount such a full-throated defense of invasion biology against some pretty vocal critics.
Exactly. And it's crucial because this paper is a direct response. It names names, well, not literally, but it addresses arguments from critics like Davis and Valerie and others.
And what are those core arguments they're responding to?
The critics are basically saying invasion biology as a distinct field is maybe slow, perhaps theoretically a bit weak, and, maybe it should just be folded into broader ecological studies.
Like succession ecology.
Succession ecology is one suggestion, yeah. Or just shifting the focus entirely to a species impact, regardless of whether it's native or non-native.
Yeah.
Just look at the damage, not the origin.
Okay.
And why this matters, why we're doing this deep dive, is because these aren't just academic squabbles. They have huge real-world consequences for you, for everyone.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a whole field is labeled obsolete or flawed, that directly influences conservation policy around the globe. It affects where funding goes for management, for research.
Right, it changes what problems we decide to tackle and how.
Precisely. It impacts how effectively we can actually protect ecosystems from invasive species.
Okay, so let's unpack that core debate. The first major line of attack seems to be about the field's, vitality, its health.
Yeah, critics point out it's relatively young, maybe 25 years old in its modern form.
And the argument is it hasn't progressed fast enough in that time. Seems a bit harsh for a young field.
That's the claim. But Simberloff and Vitule, they really push back hard here. They argue this idea of stagnation is just, factually wrong.
Okay, what's their evidence?
It's fascinating, really. They point to the sheer volume of work. If the field was dying, why are there dedicated, thriving journals? Biological invasions, neobiota, aquatic invasions. These aren't small operations.
In conferences too, right?
Big international conferences. Neobiota, IMEPI, BioLeaf. These bring together hundreds, sometimes thousands of researchers regularly, plus countless papers published every year.
So the infrastructure is booming. Journals, conferences, research output. It doesn't sound stagnant at all.
Exactly. That's the counter-argument. The evidence points towards a vibrant, growing field, not a failing one.
It does create a bit of an irony, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, the paper points out that some of the main critics, like Davis, have actually written entire books, monographs, about invasion biology fairly recently.
Yes. It's hard to argue a field is dead or uninteresting when you've just dedicated a whole book to analyzing it.
Davis even apparently called his own suggestion to terminate the field quixotic.
Right. So the paper's point is the sheer activity level contradicts the slow progress narrative.
Okay, so that addresses the health of the field critique.
Yeah.
Let's move to the first big theoretical challenge. This is the argument, mostly from plant ecologists, that invasions are really just ecological succession.
That's a major one. The idea, following earlier ecologists like Egler, is that the processes we see when an introduced plant spreads are basically the same ecological processes that drive natural changes in plant communities over time. One set of plants replacing another after disturbance.
So if it's just succession, which ecologists already study, why do we need a separate field called invasion biology?
That's the critics' question. And Simberloff and Vitule acknowledge there's some overlap. Of course, some aspects fit. But they argue a huge amount of what modern invasion biology studies involves novel interactions, things that just don't fit neatly into traditional succession models. The paper gives some really compelling examples.
Like what defies the standard succession model?
The classic example they bring up is invasional meltdown.
Invasional meltdown. Sounds dramatic.
It can be. It's when one non-native species actually makes it easier for another non-native species to invade and thrive. They help each other out, creating a bigger impact together than either would alone.
A synergy of invaders.
Exactly. The textbook case is the yellow crazy ant on Christmas Island. Its population exploded, causing massive ecological damage, but this was hugely facilitated by another introduced species, a scale insect that provided the ants with food.
Okay, I see. That kind of complex positive feedback loop between two introduced species isn't typically what you think of with standard plant succession.
Precisely. It's driven by the novelty of the interaction, the lack of co-evolved checks and balances. And it's not just about ants. They also point to aquatic invasions.
How are they different?
Well, the processes in water can be fundamentally different from plant succession on land. Think about the introduction of mysid shrimp into Flathead Lake in the U.S. That single introduction had massive ripple effects, not just in the lake, but even impacting terrestrial species like eagles and bears that fed on fish that were affected by the shrimp.
Wow. So the effects cascade across ecosystem boundaries in ways simple succession models might not capture.
Right. And even early ecologists like Elton and Egler noted that animals, especially introduced grazers, can completely change the trajectory of plant succession. It's not just plants replacing plants in a predictable way when you add novel, powerful consumers or facilitators.
That seems like a strong case for invasion biology studying phenomena that are distinct from, or at least much more complex than, simple succession.
That's the argument the paper makes.
Okay, let's move to the second major critique, the focus on origin. Critics say focusing on whether a species is native or non-native is too restrictive. Sometimes native species cause problems too, right?
They do, occasionally. A native species might become overabundant due to some other ecological change. That definitely happens.
So why the intense focus on the non-native ones?
Simberloff and Vitule answer this with cold, hard statistics. The likelihood and the magnitude of harmful impact are just vastly, vastly greater for non-native species.
How much greater?
They cite data for the United States showing non-native plant species are 40 times more likely than native plants to behave invasively. 40 times.
40. Okay, that's not a trivial difference.
Not at all. So while, yes, a native species can cause problems, the statistical risk associated with non-native species is in a completely different league.
And is there a biological reason why? Why are non-natives so much riskier?
Yes, and this goes back to the core of evolutionary ecology. Think about native ecosystems. They've had, millennia, sometimes millions of years, for species to co-evolve.
Right, they've adapted to each other. Predators, prey, pathogens, competitors. There's a whole web of interactions, checks, and balances.
Exactly. Leopold called it the ecological mechanism. It's complex, it has history. Now, introduce a non-native species. It arrives without its natural enemies from back home, and the species in the new environment have no evolved defenses against it.
It's like introducing a piece of code from a completely different operating system. It might do nothing, or it might crash the whole system because the existing checks don't recognize it.
That's a great analogy. There's no co-adaptation, and the data backs this up. Studies show non-native predators tend to hit prey harder, non-native herbivores do more damage to plants compared to their native counterparts. The lack of shared history matters.
So the focus on origin isn't arbitrary. It's based on a statistically massive difference in risk rooted in evolutionary history.
That's the paper's position, very clearly stated.
Now this brings us to what the authors call the darker charge. This moves beyond pure science, doesn't it?
It does. It touches on social science critiques and ethical arguments. Some critics have suggested, sometimes quite strongly, that the focus on non-native species is, tinged with xenophobia, nativist bias.
Using phrases like "don't judge species on their origins," that definitely carries a different kind of weight. How do Simberloff and Vitule respond to that? It's a serious accusation.
They address it head-on. They acknowledge that, yes, maybe 100 years ago, some individuals involved in early conservation or introductions might have held nativist views. History is complex.
But they argue that's not the motivation now.
Correct. They strongly assert that the motivation for modern invasion biology isn't some kind of prejudice against foreign organisms. It's driven purely by observable, often severe, ecological and economic damage.
So the focus is on the documented harm and the statistically higher risk associated with non-native species, not on the foreignness itself.
Precisely. It's about ecological risk assessment based on evidence, not about judging species based on nationality, so to speak.
Okay. This leads us to the really crucial part for policy and management. If we were to follow the critics and ignore origin, focusing only on current observable impact, why is that a bad idea? The paper argues it's really risky.
Highly risky. They lay out 4 key reasons why just waiting to see significant damage before acting is a dangerous strategy.
What's reason number 1?
Limited knowledge. Simply put, invasion biology is young. We just don't know the impacts of thousands upon thousands of introduced species. If your policy is only manage what we currently prove is harmful, you are ignoring a vast sea of unknown potential threats.
Okay, we don't know enough. What's the second risk?
Subtle impacts. Many invasions have consequences that aren't immediately obvious but can be ecologically devastating in the long run. Think about introduced plants that slowly change soil chemistry.
Like altering nutrient cycling or pH.
Exactly. That might not look like much initially, but over time it can prevent native plants from growing, fundamentally altering the whole ecosystem. It's a hidden impact, but severe.
So impacts can be sneaky.
Yeah.
That leads into the third point, which sounds related. Lag times.
Yes, lag times are critical. Many non-native species will establish and just kind of sit there, sometimes for decades, seemingly harmless. They persist at low densities. And then, sometimes triggered by environmental change or just reaching a certain population threshold, they suddenly explode. They rapidly spread across the landscape, becoming dominant and causing huge problems.
So a species that looks fine today could be tomorrow's disaster.
Absolutely. This contributes to something researchers call invasion debt.
Invasion debt, like ecological debt.
Kind of. It's the future ecological impact that's already locked in by invasions that have happened today, even if we aren't seeing the full consequences yet. We're accumulating this debt of future damage due to these lag times.
It's a ticking time bomb, ecologically speaking.
Okay.
That's scary. What's the fourth risk? It connects back to something you mentioned earlier, right?
It does. It's invasional meltdown again. Remember, one invader facilitating another.
Right.
So imagine a non-native species is present, but currently causing no obvious harm. Under an impact-only management policy, you'd ignore it. But what if the reason it explodes later is because a second non-native species arrives, one that facilitates it?
So by ignoring the first harmless species, based on current impact, you've actually set the stage for a future catastrophe when its facilitator arrives.
Exactly. You have to be proactive. Management needs to consider origin and potential future impact, informed by lag times and meltdown potential, not just reactively wait for visible damage today.
This connects to another point the paper makes, linking the call to end invasion biology with a call to sort of give up on traditional ecological restoration.
Yes, there's a related argument some critics make about accepting novel ecosystems.
Novel ecosystems, meaning what?
Meaning ecosystems that are mixtures of native and non-native species, often in combinations that haven't existed before, may be driven by climate change shifting species ranges too.
And the argument is we should just accept these new mixes.
Sort of. The argument is that fighting invasions everywhere is futile, and maybe native ranges are changing anyway due to climate change, so perhaps we should start trying to restore systems to some historical baseline. Instead, maybe focus on managing these novel systems to provide useful ecosystem services, like clean water or carbon storage, regardless of the species mix.
Basically, give up the fight for historical ecosystems and just manage the new reality.
That's the gist of that perspective. But Simberloff and Vitule strongly disagree.
On what grounds? They think restoration is possible.
They argue the narrative of futility is wrong. They point to substantial and, importantly, growing successes in both managing invasions, eradicating them from islands, controlling them elsewhere, and in ecological restoration projects.
So it's not hopeless.
It's not hopeless. It's difficult, absolutely. And managers constantly have to make tough choices, triage using risk assessment tools. They have to focus resources where the impact is highest, or where eradication is still feasible and cost-effective. They can't fight everywhere at once.
But they're fighting, and sometimes winning, which contradicts the just give up idea.
Exactly. And the big societal implication here, wrapping it all together, is that these academic debates, these calls to end invasion biology or abandon restoration, they don't happen in a vacuum. They can provide, convenient cover for policymakers who might want to avoid the costs of managing invasions or restoring ecosystems.
If scientists themselves seem deeply divided, it makes it easier to argue for inaction or favoring short-term economic gain over long-term ecological health.
Precisely. It can create the public or political perception of a major scientific controversy, even if the bulk of evidence supports the mainstream view, which can paralyze action. It's an intellectual argument with real financial and ecological teeth.
So this deep dive really clarifies the stakes. Simberloff and Vitule are making a powerful case that invasion biology isn't just relevant, it's a distinct and vital field.
Yes, justified by that unique and statistically proven higher threat from non-native species.
and that this justifies management that is proactive, that does consider origin and potential impact, not just waiting until the damage is obvious and maybe irreversible.
Absolutely. So what this really all means, the takeaway, is that understanding a species' history, its origin, its evolutionary context, that remains absolutely crucial. It's a necessary part of ecological risk assessment, of effective conservation, of making those tough triage decisions.
You can't manage the risk effectively if you ignore one of its biggest predictors, its novelty within the system.
You got it.
Which brings us back to that really chilling concept of invasion debt. Makes you think.
It definitely should.
So here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Thinking about your own local environment, what seemingly harmless introduced species might be quietly establishing themselves right now? What plants or animals are maybe accumulating that ecological invasion debt that we won't see the full impact of for years, maybe decades?
And what are the policy challenges, ethical challenges of trying to manage a threat that's largely invisible today but could be catastrophic tomorrow?
Something to consider. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.